This memory has been on my mind a lot lately. My youngest son Luke just went off to college, and while I'm proud of him, the house feels quieter than it ever has before. Too quiet, if I'm being honest. It's funny, when the kids are young, you dream of peace and quiet, but when it finally comes, it's not as comforting as you thought it would be. I don't know why, but his going away unlocked a part of my brain that honestly forgot about what I'm about to tell you. People have told my wife and I that it's normal to be thinking a little extra about memories from my kid's childhood at a time like this, so I guess it's not too surprising. I still remember when he was just a little kid, full of energy and curiosity, always getting into something. There's one memory I have of that time that is definitely not all sunshine and rainbows though. Luke was 8 years old when this happened. Even now, I can't fully make sense of it. I'm a carpenter by trade, so I'm pretty good with my hands. Always have been. I will admit that I was much more lively back then, willing to undertake all sorts of makeshift projects and such. One of my favorite projects was the treehouse I built for Luke in the backyard, which is still standing to this day. It wasn't just a simple platform nailed to a tree. I poured my heart into it. Walls, a roof, proper wooden steps leading up to the entrance. It was sturdy too. I wanted it to feel like an extension of our house to him, and I definitely succeeded in that regard. My wife Christy wasn't thrilled about it at first. She worried it was too high off the ground and unsafe. But Luke was the kind of kid who was always climbing trees anyway, and I figured it would be safer to give him a proper ladder rather than let him scramble up branches that could snap. Christy eventually came around, and Luke absolutely loved it. I should probably tell you a little bit about our property so that the story makes more sense. Our house was at the very end of a dead-end street in a relatively woodsy area. The backyard actually bordered the woods, which was part of why Christy and I fell in love with the house in the first place. It was private and peaceful, and we're kind of people that like keeping to ourselves. I still laugh when I think about all the times friends and family members have gotten lost trying to find our house. The yard wasn't huge, but I could clearly see the treehouse from our bedroom window, which was one of the deciding factors when I was determining where to build it. I wanted to be able to keep an eye on it should Luke hurt himself or something like that. I couldn't actually see inside of it because of the walls, but I had a perfect view of the steps leading up to it. From what I remember, everything was relatively normal for a pretty long time. Luke spent what I considered a normal amount of time playing in the treehouse. His older brother had kind of outgrown that phase, so Luke mostly played by himself in there. I can't remember exactly when, but at one point he started talking about an imaginary friend named Jake. We knew it was an imaginary friend because no one in the neighborhood had a child named Jake. It wasn't unusual for kids to have imaginary friends, but Luke was 8, not exactly the age where you'd still expect that sort of thing. Christy thought it was cute and innocent, but I was a little more skeptical. It seemed odd to me since Luke hadn't been the type of kid to make imaginary friends. Regardless, I didn't think much of it because he was only 8 years old. It started to get a little more concerning when Christy and I realized that Luke was starting to spend more and more time up there. What struck me as strange was that he wasn't bringing toys up there. As far as I could tell, he only had his imagination to play with. It's not like he had a game console or anything to keep him entertained, and I had been very clear about not carrying anything up there alone, as it was dangerous and I didn't want him to fall. At one point, my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to ask him about it. Luke acted extremely weird when I asked him about his friend, and said that Jake was shy and didn't like being talked about. When I asked him why he was spending so much time up there, he told me that Jake only liked to play in the treehouse, and that he didn't like coming inside. I honestly didn't know what to say. It seemed like a pretty bizarre condition. Were an imaginary friend supposed to be available wherever and whenever you needed them? I did some research later that day and found out that some kids only play with their imaginary friends in certain rooms of their house, so as weird as it was, I accepted it. Christy was pretty uneasy though. She thought Luke was taking this imaginary friend thing too far, and I honestly agreed. We weren't helicopter parents though. When it came to our kids, we let them spend their free time however they wanted to, as long as they were doing well in school and completing their chores. Most weekends, we'd let Luke play with the neighborhood kids until the sun went down. They'd ride bikes, play tag, and usual stuff. They were all good kids, and we trusted Luke to behave himself and stay out of trouble. He wasn't the type of kid to pick on other kids or get into fights, which was why I was especially concerned when Luke came home one Saturday with a black eye. I cleaned him up and asked him what happened. He looked down at the floor and didn't say anything, but I insisted that he tell me what happened and I wouldn't be mad at him. What he said next made me shiver. He looked up at me and told me that he had gotten into a fight with Jake. I had to process whose kid Jake was before realizing that he was talking about his imaginary friend. I told him not to lie to me and that he wasn't being funny. Instead of fessing up, Luke just started crying and ran to his room. Christy was convinced he'd gotten into a fight with one of the neighborhood kids and didn't want to admit it. I agreed with that. She wanted me to take down the treehouse right then and there, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. That treehouse had taken weeks of hard work, and the thought of tearing it down didn't sit right with me. I told her that I'd talk with Luke and tell him that he was taking things way too far. Luke refused to come out of his room or talk to me for the rest of the day, so getting something out of him wasn't going to happen. The next day, I decided to investigate. When I climbed up into the treehouse, what I saw made my stomach churn. Scattered around were children's socks and sneakers, all dirty and tattered. I knew for a fact that none of them belonged to Luke. I also knew for a fact that they weren't my older son's either. We had donated all of his old shoes a long time ago. That's not all that was up there. There were also food wrappers, bags, utensils, even a couple of dirty plates. Weirdest of all, there were pencil drawings of wild animals on all the walls. There was a fox, a bear, some deer. I don't remember all of them, but I do remember that they were all animals. The one that stood out to me the most was what appeared to be a gigantic spider with a face that was just completely penciled over. It was just downright freaky. I immediately climbed down and asked Luke about the treehouse. He told me that Jake only liked to talk on a full stomach, so he had to bring him food and other snacks. He then told me that the shoes and socks were also Jake's, and that Jake was pretty forgetful in general. That was it. From that moment on, I forbade Luke from going into the treehouse. I knew he was still lying to me, and I wanted to punish him until he admitted to it. I was 100% sure that Luke had found those things around the neighborhood and was making up stories to cover it up. Christy was worried about Luke's mental health, and I was too. We thought about consulting a professional should things continue. But one evening, I saw something that changed everything. I was looking out the bedroom window when I spotted movement near the treehouse. At first, I was livid that Luke was disobeying me, but then I realized what I was looking at. A sickly, frail-looking child was climbing down the treehouse steps. It wasn't Luke. He didn't look like any of the kids from the neighborhood either. His clothes were dirty, and he moved like he hadn't eaten in days. I ran outside, yelling for that kid to stop. As soon as I opened the back door, the boy darted into the woods. I chased after him, but he was freakishly fast. Within seconds, he disappeared into the trees. Christy called every parent in the neighborhood, but all their kids were accounted for. We called the police, who searched the woods thoroughly for over an hour but found nothing. No missing children had been reported in the area either. The whole thing was beyond explanation. With my consent, the police questioned my son about that kid, and what he told them was horrifying. Apparently, Jake claimed to be a magic boy who lived in the woods with his other friends. His friends were supposedly all animals, as he called them bear, fox, and names like that. Every time Jake would come to visit my son, he'd beg him to leave his family behind and join him in the woods with the rest of his friends. He'd then get mad when Luke would refuse and make these strange noises. I don't know why Luke never told me any of it, and there was a part of me that felt responsible for putting him in danger like that. The police conducted a full search of the woods but never found a thing. We never saw Jake again after that. Christy has always been incredibly superstitious and theorized that Jake wasn't real. I don't believe in stuff like that, but the way she talks about it always gives me an unsettling feeling. I honestly don't know which explanation is freakier, the fact that some paranormal entity was interacting with my son, or the thought that there might be woods folk lurking around somewhere in the forest behind my house.